collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, we'll hear from three of the keynote speakers at a conference held in Nicosia last week on trafficking in women for Labour exploitation in domestic work.
It mars the image of Cyprus abroad, unfortunately, because they allow some people, maybe they have connections, I don't know. That's why they can operate in a country that is supposed to be a European Union member state. These practices are illegal.
We need to change the procedure of how the work permit are given.
We receive a lot of complaints from domestic workers.
And academics from across the world are gathering in Nicosia this weekend for the Lady Margaret Cavendish International Conference 2015.
She wrote poetry, fiction, drama, essays, scientific essays, biography of her husband, autobiography. She published about 22 books in all, from about 1650 to about 1670.
The conference held in Nicosia last week on trafficking, in particular with emphasis on domestic workers, was organised with the cooperation of the European Parliament office in Cyprus. Their acting head is Alexandra Atalidis. She joins us now. Alexandra, the interesting thing I think that came out of all the discussions on the panels was the fact that there is a certain amount of EU legislation on this issue. We all know, I think, that it is an EU priority, but it does seem that that legislation isn't either being implemented properly in Cyprus. We haven't ratified the ILO Convention 189. We have a lot of problems. What can the European Parliament office do?
Well, what we are doing the last years is that we are trying to organize events like this so that stakeholders and policymakers will know what the legislation is and where we are not implementing the legislation in a correct way or not at all, so that they take the measures to correct this situation. Unfortunately, as you see, when we have conferences like this, there are a lot of people, especially from NGOs, but stakeholders from the public administration, usually they just deliver a speech and leave, which is something that we have to correct in Cyprus if we want to really engage ourselves in the discussion about the European agenda, and especially in this case on trafficking, which is a priority because it's part of the immigration and migration policies of the European Union and Cyprus. Unless we know that we have to establish, for example, legal ways of migrant people to apply for legal work, then we will always have a problem of traffickers exploiting situations like war regions or countries stricken by poverty, and they will exploit these people, take their money to bring them into Europe, abandon them, or make them work without any legal rights.
But the problem as well is the fact that a lot of these, usually women who are domestic workers, sign on with recruitment agencies, which presumably some of whom are licensed in Cyprus, and they're bringing them ostensibly legally, and it's only after they get here that they discover that they're expected to work ridiculous number of hours in several different locations, and very often their papers and documentation is taken away, so they don't have any recourse.
Yes, that is why I believe that the legislation should be very strict. That is why, let's say, we have to clear the area around these agencies. They have to be licensed, and in order to be licensed, we have to see who is working and who is bringing people from other countries. What are they saying to these people? These people should be able to have private interviews with either people from the immigration police or the labor ministry. Because, as you know, these people, they are under the jurisdiction of the immigration department instead of labor department. A lot of these issues fall under labor legislation, and I do not understand why we don't transfer the responsibility from the immigration department, as long as they are in the country legally. their labor conditions and their working conditions should be under the labor legislation. So
what can the European Parliament do about things like that? I mean, not a lot, actually, can you?
No, we cannot do a lot, because this is the responsibility of the European Commission. It's the European Commission who oversees how the member states implement the legislation of the European Union. So I believe that what we do is that we inform our political leadership in the Parliament about the situation when it involves a legislation adopted by the European Parliament. We report regularly on these issues, how they are applied and what are the problems. But the Commission, who is responsible, it has to come in with suggestions. Sometimes they even impose fines on member states when they do not impose the legislation well. But in this case, I think the government of Cyprus and those who are in charge, they should see this issue as an issue of urgency, because it mars the image of Cyprus abroad, unfortunately, because they allow some people, maybe they have connections, I don't know, that's why they can operate in a country that is supposed to be a European Union member states. These practices are illegal. If you bring somebody on false pretenses, if you promise them different things, and when they come they are faced with a situation that has nothing to do with what they were promised, then this is something that is illegal, and these people should not have a license to bring people. And I know that they take a lot of money from these women in order to give them the opportunity to come to Cyprus, and I believe that these licenses and these jobs, they should be under strict supervision by the government, so that the profits, if there is any profit in this area, it goes to the workers and to the people who employ them, and not to exploiters.
Well, that is Alexandra Atalidis, who is the acting head of the European Parliament office in Cyprus, one of the co-organisers and sponsors of the recent event on trafficking, with a particular emphasis on the plight of domestic workers in Cyprus. Charalambous is on the executive board of the PEO Union, and she is of course also former Minister of Labour and Social Insurance of Cyprus. She was one of the keynote speakers at that trafficking event that was held last week. Sotiroula, so many things came out during the various panels, but you have a particular knowledge of the labour law, and it does seem that the exploitation which we hear about on a daily basis in Cyprus with regard to domestic workers has been known for years, and yet we don't seem to have addressed the problem. What do we need to do?
Well, the first thing I would like to underline is the fact that when we speak now in 2015 about exploitation and trafficking of domestic workers, we have to put this in the framework of the problems that workers as a whole are facing in Cyprus, because the economic crisis. It's a fact that brings many problems to people. The labour relations are deregulated, labour standards and the rights of the workers, they have decreased.
Sorry, you're talking about the rights of workers who at least have rights. We have never addressed the fact that domestic workers have no protection whatsoever.
But we have to take this into consideration, because it makes it even more difficult to address the problem of these workers, which you are right, and I agree with you, always were the most vulnerable group of the working people. Now, what we have to do, the first thing that we have to do is that we need to change the procedure of how the work permit are given. This was a suggestion that we had when we have been in the government, and it was taken a decision that the procedure of giving work permits for domestic workers has to be moved from the Ministry of Interior to the Ministry of Labour. The second thing that we started to discuss and to do, and this has to be also done, is that the contract of employment has to be changed. Contract of employment has to have more specific, to put specification about the duties, the rights and the obligations of each part. When I'm speaking about the duties, one of the main issue for disputes between workers and employers, and this is coming from my experience as Minister of Labour, was that it wasn't very clear what the worker was obliged to do and what the notion of domestic workers is. I mean, what a domestic worker is, what have to do, what is the qualifications and the duties of this post. So we need not only to have a contract that says that the domestic worker will work for 6 days, Sunday it's a holiday, for 8 hours per day, but also what are the duties? How overtime it's going to be paid? How the whole framework will be, of course, even if we have these changes and this improvement, the whole system, the fact that workplace and the place of residence are the same, this by itself, it is a problem.
Because you can't inspect a private home, for example.
Yes, it's very difficult. Yes, it's very difficult, and it creates, I mean, when people coming from different cultures with different needs, with different habits, live together, this by itself, it
can create problems.
But the most important thing, I think, it's these two things.
All right, but what about as well the fact that since there is no organised association at the moment for these workers, did the trade union movement never think that perhaps it should take them under its umbrella somehow? Why can't they join BEO or any of the other unions?
Theoretically, there is no problem for them to join, okay? But practically, domestic workers, as for example, people that they are working in the shops, who work isolated one by one, it's very difficult for them to come and say, okay, I want you to represent me. Because the power is in the hand of the employer, who will, of course, forbidden to them to organize it, will create them problem. And when a person is by its own in an enterprise, think of the workplace, of the house as a workplace, it's very difficult for them, for a person by its own to be organized. But what we are trying to do, and that's why we are demanding the whole procedure of giving the work permits to move from the Ministry of Interior and go to the Ministry of Labour, is because this will give the right to the trade union movement to be involved as social partner to the system of discussing the terms of employment. Okay, this will give us as trade union this right to sit down with the employers or association and with the ministry and discuss the contract and the terms of employment.
So are you confident that this can be improved?
And in a way, without being those people members of the trade union, we will have the right to represent them and speak out for them.
But what difference would that make to individual domestic workers who are being asked to go and clean the mother-in-law's house, the son-in-law's house, to work on Sundays? They sleep in tiny little rooms. The dignity isn't there. I mean, there are a lot of issues here.
Of course, there are a lot of issues, and I don't say that this will be the solution of the problem, but it will help them if they know that someone is discussing their contract and their term of employment, collective organization is discussing about them. This will help them when they have problems, that organization to go and represent them in demanding their rights. So I think this is it's an essential, and it's a change that it will help the whole procedure.
Sotirula Charalambous, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Another keynote speaker at the conference was Ombudsman Elisa Savidu. You were speaking exactly about what? Because your office deals with so many different aspects of labour exploitation and trafficking.
I want to show the work my office is doing concerning the trafficking of people, especially in the workplace. And of course, this is because we receive a lot of complaints from domestic workers, women and men, but especially from women. For example, we received complaints for sexual harassment. We receive complaints because they work too many hours, more than 10, 12 hours every day. They are not free to go out. Sometimes they don't get their salaries, etc.
What can your office do in situations like that?
We investigate each complaint, and of course, for the purpose of the investigation, we have to see also the files of these women at the immigration office or the police office. It depends on the case, etc.
And are you able to help them?
Yes, many cases we manage to help them, but not always.
They're very brave when they do make a complaint, because in many cases, certainly in the past, I don't know if it's getting better, when you make a complaint, the chances are that your employer will then complain against you, and before anything gets done, you'll be deported.
In the most of the cases, they complain in our office when they face a very real, very big problem, because they leave the house where they work. And sometimes we receive complaints also from the jail where she is. It's not so easy for them. It's rare the cases where we receive complaints when the woman still works with the employer.
Cyprus Ombudswoman Elisa Savidou. And while we're on the subject of human trafficking, a quick note for you that the Freedom Dolls Initiative, which is an NGO working in Cyprus providing a voice to victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation, and indeed a safe environment for people who manage to escape while they recover. They have an event today, Friday, June the 19th, at Rebuke Lounge on Mackenzie Beach in Larnaca. It's their first annual music festival to raise awareness of human trafficking in Cyprus. Everyone's invited for live performances by all sorts of interesting people, including, of course, Harry Kakuli, who's very much involved with the Freedom Dolls. There'll be raffle prizes and Freedom Dolls and Freedom Jewellery also available on sale. You can dine with them. You do need to book a table and contact them, and they're hoping for masses of people to join them. So go to the Freedom Dolls webpage if you'd like to find out more. That's www.freedom-dolls.com.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
And a couple of other things you might be interested in. I've been contacted by Arte TV channel in France. They're working on a European collaborative documentary about climate change. They ask, do you know a place on Earth so beautiful it's paradise? If you do, they'd like you to film it. They'll be turning it into a documentary, gathering together the best sequences of videos from 47 European countries, which will then be broadcast on TV and available online during the climate change conference known as COP21, which is to be held in Paris in December this year. They'd like to know where you are and who you are. Perhaps you have a happy memory of the place you're filming. What are your fears for this place? And do you have a message for the Paris Climate Conference negotiations? If any of that applies to you, go online and look for info.arte, arte.tv/FR. And something a little closer to home, happening at the CVAR in Old Nicosia, and they've extended the run of performances of Caterina, last Queen of Cyprus. It's all about Caterina Cornaro. It's being produced in collaboration with Alpha Square, featuring Cristina Marucciu as Caterina Cornaro. And 3 more performances have been added on Monday, the 22nd of June, also on June the 26th and June the 30th. The entry fee is €10, and that includes a glass of wine. And a reminder that you're tuned to the Cyprus News Digest. I'm Rosie Charalambous. You can email me at cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The International Lady Margaret Cavendish Conference 2015 is taking place this week at the CVAR from the 18th till the 20th of June. It's organised by the University of Sheffield in association with the International Margaret Cavendish Society and, of course, the CVAR here in Nicosia. Joining me on the Cyprus News Digest is one of the keynote speakers, Professor James Fitzmaurice from Northern Arizona University and the University of Sheffield. Jim, tell us first about Margaret Cavendish. Why is there such interest in this woman from across the globe? I've looked at the list of your speakers over the conference time, and they're coming from Asia, from the US, from everywhere.
Margaret Cavendish was the first woman to publish in English lots and lots and lots. Under her own name, she wanted to be published. She didn't hide anything. She wrote poetry, fiction, drama, essays, scientific essays, biography of her husband, autobiography. She published about 22 books in all, from about 1650 to about 1670.
And that's the strange thing, isn't it? Because back in those days, if women did write, generally they took a male pseudonym for a start, I think.
Well, that came along later. They just didn't, when they wrote, and they wrote a lot, they kept it quiet. I mean, they kept it in manuscript, they passed it around among family members. You'd write poetry if you're a woman, but you'd show it to your children, you'd show it to your husband. You would not get it into print, because if you did it in print, people thought you were immodest and that you were trying to put on a great big show, and women shouldn't put on a great big show. Although men could do so, women weren't supposed to, and she was the first one as a woman who said, I don't mind putting on a great big show.
And how was she received in her time?
Well, that's a good question. People thought she was a little crazy. They thought, and it actually worked out well, because if you published a lot, there were 2 possibilities. Either you were crazy or you were bad. And so it was better to be crazy than bad. And so people thought that she was a little kind of daffy and a little nuts and maybe a little like, I don't know, Lady Gaga or something. That's probably extreme, although she did wear funny clothing.
But she was also, I think, a bit of a philosopher, a bit of a scientist
She
as
was.
well.
She absolutely was. She was the first woman ever to go to the Royal Society. And they put on a great show for her. Various important scientists demonstrated an air pump. They demonstrated, or they talked about circulation of the blood, things like that. She also put on a show for them, bringing along her entourage.
And what was her entourage?
Well, her entourage, she came in a coach and six, for one thing. And so here are all these guys, Samuel Pepys and such like, and she came in with a bunch of ladies and servants and whatnot, and she marveled, and everybody had a good time. Samuel Pepys wrote about it in his diary.
So she obviously made an impression wherever she went.
Absolutely.
But, I think she also, which back in those days again was most unusual, was a bit of a champion of animal rights.
She absolutely was, yeah.
You had cockfighting, did you still have bear baiting then? I don't know.
Yeah, you definitely had bear baiting. Actually, there was bear baiting in Sheffield up until the middle of the 19th century, and the bear pit is still there. But yeah, she wrote a poem called The Hunting of the Hare, which is extremely well known, and it's about being a rabbit and being chased by dogs. So a totally new perspective.
The conference itself, I've looked at some of the titles of the things that people are going to be speaking about. It covers pretty well everything. When you put this conference together, and I think it happens every 2 years?
Every 2 years.
How do you decide what should be included, and where do you find all these speakers who must be members of this society? What's the fascination of this woman for these people?
There are about 250, 300 people who are on our email listserv and who are on our Facebook page. And actually, anybody interested in Margaret Cavendish can just International Margaret Cavendish Society Facebook, and they can see what it is we do and join up and get the notification. So people see the notification, and maybe you're in Eastern Europe and the conference is close by, that it's in Cyprus as opposed to being in New England in the United States, and so you go to the Cyprus conference, and that's how we get people from where we get people from. Lots of people are interested in early women writers. That's one big topic. Lots of people are interested in women philosophers. That's a big topic. Cambridge University has published a lot of women philosophers from the 17th century. Margaret Cavendish was not the only one. She's probably the best known, and she did more than philosophy, and that makes a difference.
Tell us a bit about the woman, her life. She married, a little bit more about the person.
She came from a very wealthy family in East Anglia, but they did not have titles. That is to say, no one was a lord or a lady. She married into a titled family, the man who became the Duke of Newcastle, and she became the Duchess of Newcastle, and hence Lady Newcastle. That's her background. She actually, let me back up a little bit and say she met her husband as a lady-in-waiting to the Queen, who was Henrietta Maria, who was French.
And she went into exile with him.
And she went into exile with Henrietta Maria. And so here she was from a wealthy family, but not from a noble background. And the Queen did not want them to get married. And so it was a love story. They got married anyway and had this enormously happy marriage, as it turned out.
And a family?
There was already a family. His wife, his first wife had died, and so there were 5 children by the first wife. She could not have children. They made attempts to have children. The medical records are there detailing what they did to try to help the children along, but there were no children. So she basically had stepchildren, 2 of which wrote plays too. So 2 of the girls basically
So she must have had some influence on them.
Oh, well, or the father did. So the father wrote plays. That is to say, her husband wrote plays. She wrote plays. The daughters wrote plays. And a lot of that was probably performed in family circumstances, read aloud, maybe done with minimal costumes and whatnot.
And were any of her plays performed publicly in her lifetime anyway?
No.
But
since in the kind of the end of the 20th century, there's a play that's called Convent of Pleasure, and that has been performed a lot, over and over again. The United States, England, Australia, Canada. People love the play.
Now, the conference actually began yesterday, Thursday, the 18th of June, but it does continue all the way through until Saturday. So if you would like to join, I guess, Jim, there is still space for people.
There is, so come on Friday if you can get over, or come Saturday. we'll be happy to have you in either case. Saturday is a half day, but it's still a day.
And that is Professor Jim Fitzmaurice from Northern Arizona University and the University of Sheffield, talking about the International Lady Margaret Cavendish Conference 2015. It's happening right now at the CVAR in Admiral Street in Old Nicosia. It started yesterday and it runs through until lunchtime on Saturday. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.